Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue, and feast your eyes on these procedurally generated, octane rendered, probably delicious frog's eggs. Yes, frog's eggs. I don't know why I made a bunch of frog's eggs, had some idea in my head, and just started messing around until I got something I liked. And yeah, big clutch of frog eggs in the middle of a swamp, I guess, or some sort of pond. I thought they looked kind of cool though, and using them, here's a close-up shot. You can kind of see the little embryos there, some little detritus in the water. Some of these embryos are in various stages of dividing. There's some 4 dividing and 2 dividing, and just nuclei, I guess. Probably by the time they're this size, they're mini cells, but that's not how I made it. So that's what it is. Not exactly biologically accurate, I guess, but looks pretty neat. And so, but there is an interesting way to make these procedurally using, in some part, the Tropism plugin, which is a really cool thing. It's not just for trees. You can use it for all kinds of stuff, like frog's eggs. And I'm going to go through how I made these, and I think it'll strike up some interesting workflows for creating other procedural types of geometry that you wouldn't really model. This isn't something you'd really model with traditional modeling tools, but you can create really infinite varieties of these things with, let me just zoom in here, with the procedural tools. And yeah, pretty cool. And Octane does this beautiful job of rendering them. Lots of depth of field and this sort of translucent material and some displacement on the embryos. And some volumetric fog in there as well, which I'll show you how to do. So yeah, there we go. Let's go over to MODO. Here we are in MODO. This is the finished scene. Here's the Octane render window. If you want to know how to put the Octane render window in your main MODO layout, there is a tutorial for that, which I will link to. And here we've got the camera view. Let me just kind of go to perspective so you can get an eye on the scene, see what we're going to be making. And so we've got this sort of big cube surrounding the outside that helps us with our volumetric fog. You see there is this sort of spherical point cloud with all these little pieces of wood, these little things floating around in the water, replicated in there. There's 2 things. I've done a lot of water animations and imagery for the Monterey Bay Aquarium and Discovery Channel and a bunch of other places throughout my career. And water, 2 things water always needs is fog and detritus, or particles in the water, to really sell that underwater look. All these little particles here floating around in the fog and as things recede back into the background. I actually like to use a depth map and control the fog in post, but I'm using just Octane built-in volumetric mediums here, which I will show you. Some larger sticks and twigs coming through the camera. Camera is maybe kind of hard to see on YouTube, but there's my camera right there. There's a couple area lights. There's, let's see, this scene. There's one shining from above right there, and there's one kind of coming in from the side right there, right here. Here's our camera, and that's giving some of this light, some of these refracted elements here on the frog's eggs. Frog's eggs themselves, I think I'll just grab these 2 guys and isolate them like so. And yeah, so this sort of mass of jelly here on the outside, that's one contiguous mesh. I'll show you how to make that. And then of course this replicator with the different kinds of eggs in here, some divided and some not divided in various ways. And yeah, so let's get started. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm using a plugin for MODO called Tropism, and it is commonly used as a tree generator or plant generator. I'm going to be using it for another purpose. And what's great about Tropism is it's really just a set of 5 mesh operations that you can use for all kinds of things. It just integrates with MODO's other mesh operations, so you can use them. They're really flexible, and I will be creating a big strand of frog's eggs instead of a tree. So let me show you how Tropism works in general and how we're going to use it. Okay, so here we are in MODO, and I'm going to pop open my mesh operations stack, and I've got an empty mesh item here. So typically when you use Tropism, you would you can see it's got its own little container here, and here's the 5 mesh operations. Typically, you would start with the point scatter node, and you see this tree shape there, right? And so it has a lot of options for point scattering. It could scatter, it can make a tree distribution. It could also scatter within a volume or a surface or a curve. Super flexible. It can use it for a bunch of things, not just trees. Typically what you do is you'd add an SPC operator after that. This is sort of the heart of the Tropism plugin. And this is sort of a rules-based system for growing curves between these points. So you have some properties over here that let you do things like, increase the maximum number of nodes or points that it looks at as it's growing. So we've just kind of grown up the tree there. I may also do something like reduce the step length like that, so it's more detailed. There's more points and get more detail there like that. And then I can increase the nodes again, have sort of more detailed tree. I can reduce the kill distance to get more branching. I can, up the node calling to get, that's probably too much, up it to like 3 to have sort of a simpler, maybe like 5, sort of a simplified set of branches there. It'll kill the smaller, tiny little branches at the end. So there's lots of stuff you can do with it. But the SPC operator does not just work with point scatter. Like I said, it works with all kinds of things. So if I just start a new scene here, and I say I create a torus. There's my torus, and I just grab the points here and cut them and paste them like that. And then I can just add, here's my torus points. I can add the SPC operator to these points as well. And it's just going to grow these curves between the torus points. So you can use it, just with regular points. And it has this little locator here where you can define, whoops, let me just go in item mode, where you can define the starting points. So if I just put it over here, you can see it's growing points along the torus, starting from that locator. And then I can do, again, I can do all kinds of things like, for instance, I could, reduce the step length here and then increase the max nodes and, grow out. You can see it sort of, turn off the curves there, see it growing there. And whatever, reduce the kill distance. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. And then again, you could always you could animate all these parameters. So anyway, it's just a really, really pretty awesome plugin. So I'm going to use Tropism's SPC generator to generate these sort of chaotic strands that I can grow the eggs along. And that's what I've, so you can see this sort of strand here, or this sort of mess of strands like this. So those strands are created with tropism, and these eggs are replicated along those strands. So let's see how I create the strands. And instead of using the point scatter node that comes with tropism or using a mesh like the torus, I'm actually going to use a particle simulation to create that sort of chaotic mess of strands. And so over here on my rigging tab, I go down to particles, and I just create a radial emitter. There it is. So if you're not familiar, I just close that panel right now. So if you're not familiar with these 3 little green buttons down here, one on the far left just starts a simulation and plays it sort of outside of time. It doesn't use a timeline. It just sort of plays it forever. This is nice where you can just sort of turn on the simulation and then go in and start adjusting parameters like emission rate and things like that. So we've got more particles coming out of here. So there's a big emission rate. Whereas this next one will just play along the timeline. It'll include any keyframes, or you can see the timeline button go in there. It'll include any keyframes or animation you have. And then the last one will actually, compute the simulation in the scene and save it to a cache. So we're actually just going to turn on our play button here so I can adjust this until I get something I like, and then we'll worry about the computing the simulation. So in the particle simulation node, you can actually change the color, which I usually change it to sort of a blue-green, and up the size of the particles to like 2, so I can get a little better look at it. And then I just want to add a couple of other nodes to this. I want to add a turbulence node. So you can see they're starting to spin around a little bit more. And I'm going to up the turbulence to maybe 200 in strength and torque. So they're kind of flying around like crazy. And so what I want to do is then add a drag node to sort of slow everything down. So I got a drag node on there. And now it's starting to slow down. You're starting to see some interesting shapes happening. So, this is kind of a cool looking shape, right? Now imagine a curve growing up and branching along this shape. That's the sort of strand we're going to get, and eventually grow some frog's eggs along. So But our scale isn't quite right, so in turbulent force, I'm actually going to decrease the scale a little bit, see if I can get a little more detail there, so maybe 20%. And it's coming out a little bit faster, so let me increase the drag force a little bit. I think 400% on those. Okay, interesting. Getting a little something there. I can also go over to my radial emitter and just slow down the initial velocity to like 150 millimeters a second, something like that. And I'm also going to go to the particle simulation node and increase the lifespan of these particles. So maximum age, let's just say 300. And so they live a little longer and will sort of travel a little bit farther. Just back up here. I'm actually going to tweak this down just a little bit. All right, drag strength. And so, as you can see, like playing with particles you're really just messing with these parameters until you get something you like. And so it is a lot of educated guessing, and that's just how it works. And so we're getting something there. It's coalescing a little bit. Let me get a little more drag on there. We'll look at it from different angles. Okay, not bad. You see the particles are starting to die out, so we're getting sort of a shape here. This isn't bad. I'm going to increase my number of particles for my radial emitter, maybe to like 1,000. I'm going to slow down their initial velocity a little bit. Velocity spread, I'm not sure exactly what that does, to be honest. But I'll turn it down. We'll see. And so again, like the lifespan on these guys is, it's about 10 seconds, so it's going to take a while for the older ones to die out. And we'll just see the newer ones in here. Okay. Just looking at it from different views. Doesn't have to be perfect, but this looks like something we can work with, I think. Yeah, okay. So now that we're here, let me just pause it. I'm going to actually increase my frame range to about 500 frames. And then I'm going to compute the simulation with this last button here, 0 to 500. It should just happen so fast you don't even notice it. There it goes. Then I can just drag through and look at it. And yeah, it looks pretty good. This looks like something I want to use as a base for my tropism nodes, SBC nodes. So, okay, so I've got these particles here, and I'm going to take my empty mesh item here. Let me just move my camera light above it. Kill that light. Don't like that aerial distant light there. And I call this frozen particle sim. And I'm going to do a mesh merge operation because you can merge particle systems into meshes now. So merge meshes, and I'm going to bring that particle simulation, add sources, make sure you go to existing, choose your particle simulation. Now that particle simulation is going to be merged into this mesh. I'm actually going to group all these particle nodes and just call it particle group. And I'm going to hide it. Boom. And if I turn on Verts here, you're going to see the Verts from that particle system. And I can actually, since it's all cached, I can drag through it. But really, I just want one of these frames out here, right? This looks pretty good. And then I'm going to right-click on this. I'm going to say freeze mesh operations, duplicate and freeze. So I like to duplicate and freeze because I like to keep the older sort of history of the scene around in case I want to adjust something. So what that does is it'll hide the procedure one, and it gives me this frozen one here. It's just frozen on this last frame. So if I drag now, I'm not seeing the entire particle simulation. I'm just seeing that frame that I've frozen on. And it's just a bunch of verts now, but it's in a kind of a cool looking shape that I like. So I can clean this up manually. I can grab some of these outline verts here and just delete them. Nice thing about MODO is you can just cut, copy, paste, and delete stuff like nobody's business. It's really the best program for treating geometry like pixels. So, all right, that looks good. I think the plugin will take care of most of these outliers, and we can just probably ignore most of them, but looks good to me. This is a good place to start. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add my tropism SPC operator. So I've got it here. I'm going to grab the locator that it comes in with in item mode, and I'm going to move it to the bottom. I'm going to start our growth down here by this little area. Let's say right around there. Looks good. And that's where it starts. And so you'll notice that it's sort of skipping all this stuff and jumping up here. That's because our step length is too high. So we need to reduce the step length to get more detail in there. So I'm going to reduce it way down to like just 10 millimeters. And you can see it's barely growing at all. But I'm going to increase the node count now. So then I'm going to increase the maximum nodes. And you'll see it starting to grow. Let me just hide Verts. You'll see it starting to grow up along that particle system. Interesting. Okay, so got something going on that I like. Let me turn my Verts back on, see what I have here. So, okay, so I'm going to actually decrease the influence radius because I think we're making too big of jumps here. So the influence radius is this green guy here. I'm going to increase that, decrease it quite a bit, like 50. And that'll give me much more detailed, so it's not making those big leaps now. What I mean by big leaps is this used to be like way up here at almost a meter, and you see it has some of these really, it's jumping from down here all the way up here, these points down here all the way to up here because it's within the influence radius. So as you're growing up here, it sees a point and it's like, okay, where should I grow next? And if this influence radius is really big, it considers these as potential places to grow. I don't want it to jump up there. I just want it to, you know, grow really slowly up and just grow to really close points. So I'm going to make that way down at 10. The influence radius. Actually, is that too small? 0.1? Okay, 0.1, not 10. Okay, 0.1's probably pretty good. Hide the Verts, and here, you know, it's starting to look kind of interesting again. Maybe 0.05, 50 millimeters. Again, looking pretty good. Okay, so, and then what I don't need is I don't need all these little filigree strands there, right? I really just want sort of continuous long strands without all the little additional branches. And so I can do a couple things. I can do node calling. So let me just, you know, crank this up slowly. Maybe 2, maybe 3. Get rid of those guys. Kill distance, I can also, if I decrease it, I'm going to get more branchiness. But if I increase it, I'm going to get less branchiness. So getting, actually I want even probably less than that. That's too much. Let's do call some more nodes. Maybe 5, maybe 8. That's probably not enough yet. Maybe 12. Something like this. Maybe even a little more. 16. Yeah. So something like this looks pretty cool. I think we can go with it. I likey. Okay. So here we have all these points here still, but we have just these guys, these curves growing in there. And I'm actually going to change these from polytype line to curve. And so these are just sort of standard MODO curves now. And then I need to extract these from this mesh, but I want to do it procedurally. I don't just want to copy and paste and freeze this and copy and paste the curves out because I want to keep this scene procedural in case I want to change something. So I'm going to add a new mesh, and I'm going to call this extracted curves, growth curves. And I'm going to do a merge mesh on it. And I'm going to merge in this frozen particle sim. Actually, let me rename these. So this is, let's call this frozen particle sim. Let's call this SBC growth curves, because that's where our curves are growing. That's what we just did. We froze the particle sim, and then we grew curves on it. So we'll just call that SBC growth curves. Still has all those points there, though, right? So we hide that, and here on our extracted growth curves, our source, we want the SBC growth curves. So now I just hide this one we just made. So here's the SBC growth curves, which is using the particles from this merge mesh here. So if I drag through here, here's our frozen particle sim, or merge mesh particle sim, a bunch of points. And then we took that and we froze the last frame and we grew these curves in it with the SBC operator. And now I'm going to merge that into this new mesh, and I'm going to do some other mesh operations to delete these extra points. Okay? So I'm going to add an operator. I'm going to say delete, and that just deletes everything, which is fine. I don't need to show this this root SBC root loc anymore. I could just hide that. So I don't want to delete everything. I do want to do selection type vertex, but I want to use some selection operators to define what I want to delete. So I'm going to do add selection, I'm going to add a selection operator. I can do a selection assembly here. And first I want to do is select those curves. So I want to do select curve polygons. Got them. So all the curve polygons are now selected. Basically what I want to do is get the curve vertices selected and then invert it. So I've got the curve polygons selected. And I'm going to add a convert selection operator right here. Add selection, convert. And those are going to convert those to vertices, because it's basically going to convert it to whatever this operator wants. It wants vertices. I've selected polygons. I'm going to convert it to vertices, which is what it wants. And then it deleted them. So it deleted all the vertices that were in these curves, which also deleted the curves. But all I need to do is either invert this like this, or you can also do an invert particle operator as well. Either way, either one works, doesn't matter. Keep in mind, these selection operators, not particle operator, selection operator, these selection operators, like everything in MODO, it's read from the bottom up, right? So just like these mesh operations are read from the bottom up, I merged it, I deleted some things. These selection operators are also read from the bottom up. I selected the curve polygons, I converted the curves to points, and then I inverted the points and got rid of all those extra points there that I didn't want. So all that's left in this mesh is these curves. Okay, pretty sweet. So what am I going to do with these curves here? Well, I can do a couple things. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this sort of outer gelatinous layer. So this blobby stuff is what I'm going to make next, and then I'm going to create the eggs that go inside. All right, so let's replicate some spheres along these curves to get our gelatinous blobby layer. And I need a prototype, so I'm going to do an empty mesh here, and I'm actually going to call this gel sphere proto. Just keep name things that make sense, because the scene actually gets a little bit big. And I'm actually going to do a mesh operation for the sphere instead of just creating one with the regular sphere tools, just because I can change it later if I want to into something else really easily. And instead of a globe, we'll do a tessellation and subdivision level of 3 or so. So you get this triangulated subdivision here. And for the radius, maybe I'll do 0.05, Control Alt Enter, and it'll do it for all 3 fields. Still a little big, maybe a 0.02. That looks about right. And so that is going to replicate all along our curves here. And then I need a replicator, of course, to do that. So let's add a replicator. And we'll call this gel replicator. So gel replicator, I guess. And for our prototype, we're going to use that sphere we just made, gel sphere. And for the point source, we're going to use those extracted growth curves. And there we go. So getting there, right? So they're all overlapping. That's fine. We want them to overlap, and we'll take care of that in the next step. We can hide the prototype here. But I do need a little more variation on these, so I can do that within the replicator itself and just the random scale, maybe a 20% adjustment in scale there, maybe even 25. Maybe I'll do just a tiny random offset, like 0.003 for all 3 channels like that, just to get it sort of more blobby and organic looking. Now we want to create one contiguous skin of polygons, right? Not just have a bunch of replicated spheres that are intersecting. And we have to do this with a couple of different steps. And so create a new mesh again, so you can do add item, new mesh, or you just press in. And I'm going to call this gel merged replicator. You can guess what we're going to do. We're going to merge mesh our replicator into this new mesh. So again, merge mesh, our favorite mesh operator. You'll notice we do these a lot. And then this time we're going to pick our replicator as the source. So there it is. If I hide my replicator, we'll see that this replicator has now been merged, all this geometry merged into one mesh. So these are just polygons. Of course, they're all individual spheres still, right? So it's not one nice contiguous skin, just a bunch of spheres. So we have to do a couple more steps. Now, I wish we had a VDB voxel mesh operator that I could just add on top of this, but we do not. So we have to actually add a VDB voxel item. So I'm going to do add item, VDB voxel. There it is. And we're going to use a source item, and that's going to be our gel merged replicator. So source item, gel merged replicator. You can also do this in the schematic. So if I look in a schematic and add my VDB voxel here, you'll see it's got a connection there. So there's, there's our merged replicator, and here's our VDB voxel. You'll see this sort of grid around like that. And what I want to do is I want to generate a voxel mesh. And there it is. Not so great, right? So it's just this big blob in the middle. And what we need to do is increase the mesh resolution. So you'll see these little cubes here on the grid. We need lots more cubes to really accurately define this mesh here. So I'm going to go from, if you look at voxel resolution, if it's at 4, I'm going to turn up to 40. And all of a sudden, it's quite a bit better. It's not great, but it's way better. And so let's turn it up. I think it goes up to 256 is the highest amount. I'll just go like 200, see what it looks like. All right, 200. I'm going to turn off my gel merged replicator here. And I'm going to turn off draw grids. And we'll just, look at it. And it's a little bit blobby, and it still has this sort of geometric, this sort of weird sort of stepping here, and that's just the voxel resolution, but we can take care of that. And we can take care of that with some mesh operators, and as you might imagine, I'm going to be doing yet one more merged mesh. This is why I wish VDB voxel was just a mesh operator. Wouldn't have to create the separate item. I could just add it on top of the merging in the replicator, then turn into a voxel, and then smooth it out. But I don't have VDB voxel as a mesh operator, so I'm going to have to, create a new mesh. So Matt Cox, MODO Architect, if you're watching, let's get a VDB voxel mesh op in there. So we're going to call this Final Gel. How about that? We're getting really close. And turn off my voxel. I'm going to do a merge mesh again. I'm going to add my voxel into the merge mesh right here. So VDB voxel, there you go. Merge mesh will merge pretty much anything in MODO now. Particles, voxels, replicators, other meshes, instances, all kinds of stuff. So here it is. It's just a bunch of points now. So I can actually go in and add a smooth operator. So add smooth and throw it on top. And let's add, I don't know, like 100. Turn off lock corner because there's no corners on this, obviously. And maybe 100 iterations. And it's probably going to take a second to calculate that. And there it goes. So that's pretty good. That looks like a blobby, gelatinous mess, right? And it's sort of kind of cool in there. It's connecting, and it looks really good, I think. I'm fine with this resolution. If you want to, run a retopo, algorithm over it, and then turn it into quads and sub-D it, fine. But this is fine for me. I think this renders just fine. And we've got quite a bit of calculation going on here with the smooth algorithm. So again, what I'm going to do is final mesh. I'm going to just right click and I'm going to say freeze mesh operations, duplicate and freeze. That means I keep my original with the mesh operator, but it also just freezes it so it doesn't have to recalculate that all the time. We'll just call this final gel frozen. And we have our final gel right there, looking good. Okay, so now we just need to replicate the eggs inside of this gel. All right. So let's look at the eggs. There's not one inside every blob, so it's not a perfect 1-to-1 ratio. And they're not perfectly in the center as well, which is fine. We want that sort of randomization. And there's I think 3 different prototypes in here. There's just a spherical one. There's one with a split in the middle. Then there's these sort of quarter or ones that are split 4 ways. Maybe here's one right here. And yeah, so let's go in here. Let's go back to MODO. Now, if you remember our original replicator here, let me just turn it on. It has all these overlapping spheres. And it was using this extracted growth curve here that we made in Tropism as the point source for the replicator. So I want to keep this procedural. So if I change these growth curves for the gel, I want that to also change where the eggs are located automatically. So I don't want to create a whole new one for the eggs. I just want to mesh merge again. So we're going to add a new mesh, and we're going to call it extracted growth curves eggs, and we're going to mesh merge in, or just merge mesh merge, and the original extracted growth curves. So existing, we want extracted growth curves, and I could just hide the extracted growth curves there. So we've got the exact same thing now. But if the eggs, of course, are less dense, so I need to change the number of points here to have fewer points or less dense points. And I'll do that with a curve rebuild or rebuild curve. Rebuild, curve rebuild. It is curve rebuild. And instead of a point count, which is just sort of not getting the sort of consistent spacing, I want to do exact distance. And so I want to adjust the spacing here with exact distance, maybe 0.02 or 0.01, maybe try 0.033. How about that? Sounds good. 0.033. And I can add a new replicator. So, whoops, new replicator, and this will be our egg replicator. So let's call it egg replicator. And the point source will be the extracted growth curve eggs, the one right here. And then I need some new prototypes. So I'm just going to press N for a new mesh, and I'm going to call this egg proto A. And then I'm going to make a quad ball, Catmull Clark mesh, and I think 20 millimeters, I think, was our, maybe is the size of the original blob we used for the gel, something like that. So something, we could change this, but something along those lines. So there's my quad ball, hit D twice, I guess, just to subdivide it. And then, yeah, that's good enough for this one. I'm actually going to just press M for material and call this egg. Now I'm going to duplicate this guy, Control D, call this egg proto B. And I'm just going to click my little hide everything but the currently selected layer. So let's split this guy. So double click to get this edge loop selected, press B for edge bevel, and just I think if you have a round level of 1, it'll create edge loops on either side. And I can double click that middle edge loop and just scale it in. Looking pretty sweet, like it's splitting there. And I'm just going to hover here, go into item mode, and press 5 and duplicate this guy, call this egg proto C. Same thing, double click that loop, bevel just a tad, double click the middle, and scale it in. All right, subdividing that tadpole looks good. And then for my egg replicator, I need 3 prototypes, and I can't add them all here in on this little drop-down menu, so I do need to open up the schematic. So grab A, shift click, add, so all 3 of them there, add selected, put them in the schematic. Then if I hold shift and grab the little purple graph connector and plug that into prototypes, and then I can turn off my isolate select there and hide all 3 of these guys. And there's my egg replicator. Okay, so not bad, need some work. They're not quite lined up where we want them. And if I turn on my final gel frozen here, and I'm actually just gonna give this gel material and make it transparent so I can see through it. So go over here and make my gel material slightly transparent, or very transparent, as we're 100% transparent, and turn off those guys there. So you can see, you know, the eggs are too big, right? They're too big for the gel. So there's a couple ways we can deal with this. One is you just go to the prototype, I'm sorry, the replicator, and there's a base scale option. I can turn this down to like 65%, and that looks pretty good. They're all kind of in there. They're not quite exactly, you know, in the middle of everything, which is fine. We can adjust. If you can always go back to this curve shape here and, you know, adjust the curve rebuild to sort of offset them a little bit. And you can also do like a delete. If you want to just kill a few of them, add a delete mesh op with a random selection. So just type in rand here in the selection assemblies, rand, select random. And what this will do is it starts at 50%, but you really only want like 5% or so deleted, maybe 10%. You know, that's killing quite a bit of them there, so maybe 5%. I don't know, just kill a few of them. So, all right, looking all right. And then yeah, get a decent camera angle here, and we'll start working on the shading. So yeah, how you want to frame this? I usually want to get a little bit of the strand in the foreground, depending on where I want my focal point. Maybe get this my focal point here, so I have a little bit of depth of field in the foreground and background like this. Then you could add some sticks or things to sort of balance the image out. But that looks all right to me. And then, yeah, let's jump into Octane really quick to play around with this a little bit. For my eggs replicator, I can do a little more here. I can just add a little bit of random variation, maybe like a 10% random scale, and random twist. Let's do 360 on everything, so they're all sort of spun around. maybe just a tiny offset like 0.001, something like that, or 0.002. Yeah, something like that, just so it's a little more random. I'm going to just break down the shading of the scene rather than build it up from scratch because we're running pretty long here on this tutorial. There's a few things, like I mentioned, that make this image work. One is the depth of field, because it really establishes the scale of these guys is really small. And so you have this sort of macro effect with this nice depth of field here. And you can, obviously pick different focal points and find some cool... this is really the same image as the first one. We're focused here, and here we're focused in the midground here. So the depth of field really adds to it. Secondly, like I said, it's an underwater image. So one, you need a fogging effect. We have here using the Octane scatter node in the environment, which I'll show in MODO in just a second here. We also have all this detritus, all these little pieces of wood and debris floating in the water. That really helps as well. Secondly, we've got little pieces of debris stuck to the gel. Little tiny pieces like this, like stuck to the gel, same debris that's floating in the water. And we have this cool sort of absorption effect on the gel itself. So it's both an absorption effect. You see the refraction here. So there's a couple of things going on. One is a rough refraction to give it sort of a translucent look instead of a hard glass transparent look. And the second one is an absorption effect, which I'll show you how to do as well. So jumping over to MODO. Here I've got the scene just loaded in, and I'm just going to break it down real quick. One, there is this particle cloud here, which is literally just the particle cloud item set to a sphere mode, and that is a source for this replicator with all these little chunks in it. And instead of adding all these chunks individually to the replicator, they're all put into a group. And so these wood chunks, there's like 46 different chunks there in this group. And that group is just fed into the replicator, just like you would a prototype. So here's the replicator. Here's the particle cloud going into this particle source. And here's the wood chunks going into the prototypes, that whole group of wood chunks. This group is also going into this replicator, which is the one that's the little tiny guys that are stuck on the gel itself. So all these little pieces stuck on the gel itself. Let me just go to like a reflection mode or something like that. See it a little bit better. I don't know if that's better actually. Default. Anyway, so the way I did that is I took the gel item right here, the frozen gel mesh, and fed that into a surface particle generator. And you see, if I pull out here, you can see the little particles, all the little orange particles scattered all over this mesh. And so each one of those gets one of those little wooden chunks, which helps. And then, of course, there's some sticks in there. This larger piece right here is really providing the backdrop. So you see this greenish flat color. That's really the back wall of this chunk here. And the way this works is, I'm just going to go into the regular workspace here. And over here on the environment tab, I just have my environment item. I've got that somewhere right here. And the environment item has a channel. You can see it right here, this medium octane. So I'm using octane in this renderer here. In MODO, you can just use the regular fog on the shader. And octane, I'm using this medium item here. And what you need to do is go over to your octane textures and you add a medium. So here's my medium input, and I go over here to new medium. I've got a couple options here, absorption and scattering. Absorption we're going to use on the actual gel, but scattering is what we're using on the background, and here's the scattering one. And we've got a couple things in here. We've got a, I have absorption set to invert, or checked invert absorption. That means I could just pick a color, this color here for my scattering. In this case, I actually have a gradient node, and I've got a bit of a noise as the input. So we've got some noise and black and white noise in the volumetric noise in the filling up this area, and the noise, the white noise, is mapped to this greenish color, and this other one to this little slightly more green color, and that is fed into the gradient, which is then fed into the absorption slot here. And then the scattering slot has this one. It's just 0.08. If I increase the scattering, let me just actually show you how this works with a limited region rendering here. Where's my limited region rendering? There it is. Let me zoom. Let me just kind of do this. So if I look at my, there's a couple settings here that are making this work in the scattering node. So the medium scattering node. One is density, set really low to 3. If I set this high to like 75, you're going to notice that, and hit play here, you're going to notice that it's just pure black. So if I back this off to like 15, still pretty dark. 10, starting to see some stuff. 5, pretty green. I'm getting these colors here that are going into the scattering node. And so I can back it up as much as I want. You know, I think I had it at 3, like that. I can also increase the scattering. So here the scattering is pretty low, 0.08, but if I really draw it up a bunch, I have a much thicker effect. So this median is really scattering the light like crazy. So I don't want to scatter that much, just a little bit. And so that's how the fog is working in Octane. So just a little bit of scattering and not too much density. So it's sort of an interplay between your scattering amount, your scattering value, and your density. And that's how that is working. Let me just knock down the scattering just a little bit, back to where it was or so. And I'm just going to push in a little bit here. And then the next one is this gel material. Let me just pick it over here. Final gel. And this is, again, this is a specular material in Octane, which gives you the sort of glass materials. And the difference here is two-part. One, again, let's look at a limited region here. Let me find another region that's somewhat in focus, maybe. That's a little bit in focus, so let's grab these guys here. And I'm going to increase, well, first, actually, I'm going to decrease the roughness. So if the roughness is 0, that gel just kind of looks like glass, right? Pretty sharp reflections there, pretty sharp refractions. Just looks like glass. And really, we want it to be kind of translucent. So we want to scatter the rays a bit with roughness to make it translucent. So I'm actually going to bump my roughness up to whatever it was, maybe 0.25 or something. If you bump it up a ton, like 0.85, you'll see that you can barely see through it, right? Super translucent looking, which is kind of a cool look, but not really what we're looking for. We want it down to like, 0.15 or whatever it was. And maybe a little more than that, I think. I can't remember what it was, 0.3 maybe. And the other aspect we want to deal with is, again, a medium. So we've got a medium slot on this specular node as well. And we've got, we added the absorption medium here. And again, I'm clicking invert absorption. Basically what I'm doing is, if it's not clicked, I'm absorbing this color and I'm getting the opposite of it. So I'll be getting, like this color. So if I, right now, if I unclick this invert absorption, right, then I get that. But by clicking invert absorption, it just lets me pick the color I want. So in this case, I don't want blue, I want that sort of yellowish color. And so I get that there. And then I just increase my density if I want to really, make it a thicker sort of yellow albium sort of look, like that. So you get whatever I want, but it sort of builds upon itself. Where these guys overlap, you see it getting thicker, that sort of density is increasing, that absorption, more light is being absorbed, so you get sort of this cool variation in color there. You don't have to make it that thick. And yeah, I don't know. What else? I think the actual eggs themselves, let me just click that guy. Nothing super interesting going on here. I've got a gradient right here. So there's the colors of the gradient, just the sort of greenish and greenish gray black. And I'm using this fall-off map here in Octane. This is the equivalent of doing an incidence angle in MODO. So there's a lighter color on the outside and a darker color on the inside, based on the angle, the incidence angle to the eye. That's what the fall-off map is in MODO or Octane. And I also have a normal map on here with just an image map, just sort of an organic looking image map. And then again, similar map using that for displacement. And if I were to get in there real close, you see this kind of cool, highly detailed displacement. I also have on my camera, whoops, on my camera, yes, my camera. On the imager, I have denoising enabled, and I have it denoise volumes as well, because that whole environment median is a volume. And I actually have a mix, though. I have a blend set to 0.6 because I found that, let me see if I can find my render region here. There's the beauty, denoise beauty. Actually, you know what? It's not with render region activated. And I have this set to denoise on completion. Maybe I have to turn that off to get the denoising within the render region. Yeah, so there's a slight difference here. If I turn this to 0, you see it's like super smooth versus no denoising, super smooth. And so if I point it, to put the blend to 0.5 or so, I get a little bit of that cool graininess back, and I don't lose all my detail on my displacement in here. So see that little chunky detail of the displacement on the eggs. If I have denoising cranked up to 100%, it just loses a fair amount of that. So it's a little too smooth and unnatural looking on these guys. So, God, it kind of looks like the Alien Queen's egg sac there. Creepy. I think that's it. So, just in general, and I know this is a really long video, and I hope you bore with me. I don't know why I decided to do this one, but I think in general, if you look at, this sort of geometry, again, this isn't something I think people would normally do with traditional modeling tools. So MODO really does, I think, have the best traditional modeling tools in the business. But as mesh ops become more and more mature, which each new version, and we get plugins like Tropism, we can really adopt a more sort of Houdini or Maya-like procedural modeling take and do some of these kind of cool looking procedural images like this. So anyway, hope that was enjoyable. I know it's 17 hours long, but it takes a while to make frog's eggs.
Yum, yum!